Hi, well, this is going to be our first critique section for this class. What we're going to do is go through your images and discuss them, talk about how we might improve them, and show you the techniques for doing that. It's important that you kind of watch the whole set of critiques so that you can see how we deal with not just your images, but other people's images as well. In this case, for this first project, there weren't that many turned in for a class this size, and that concerns me a little bit. But we'll work with what we have and then go from there. So our first shot here is this humorous shot of a dog spot, a dog's bathroom. And whoever created this is the one who really made the humor, not just the photographer who was seeing it. But it is kind of funny nonetheless. The problem here is that the gag, which is really kind of located here in this sign, and the plaster dog and the fire hydrant and all of that, is hidden in all of this incredibly busy stuff. This could be a whole lot better if you could either get in closer or maybe change the angle of view and really allow the viewer in on the joke without having to make them look so hard for it. We've got all of this conflicting stuff. So here's a basic rule to begin with. When you're taking a photograph, decide what the main subject is. What's the focal point? What is the point of your photograph, the story of it? Everything else in the image area needs to relate to that. It either must support it and enhance it, in which case you want to keep it, or if it doesn't, if it distracts from it, if it dilutes the message, then you want to get rid of it. If you can crop it out, great. What you may have to do is change your angle, change your point of view, change something to let us in on the joke. In this case, we can't really change the angle because it's already shot, but perhaps we can crop a little bit to get into what's really happening. So we'll pick up the crop tool and let's get rid of some of this confusing stuff. I don't want to crowd this too much because we've got the dog looking in this direction. Whenever you've got a clear line of direction, either because you've got things moving that way or you've got things looking that way or people looking that way, don't push them right up against that side. It feels crowded unless that's what you really want to convey. In this case, I'm going to come in just a little bit closer. I want enough of the fire hydrant in there that you can see it. But that's really about all we need. Now, there's no doubt that this is where the main story is. Now, what we could do is try to put a little detail back in our dog. This would have been much easier to do in Adobe Camera Raw when you made the conversion by bringing the highlights back. I don't know if there is information in here that we can use to try to recover it. But let's see. If we go to Filter, now we can go back into Camera Raw. The problem is, when we did it as a raw image, it was non-destructive. Now we're going to be making some changes to it. But let's see. We'll come grab the highlight. We'll pull it down. No, there's really not much there. There's a little bit there, but not a lot. But we'll take what we can get. Say okay. That's a fairly simple way to deal with selected areas. Remember, when you're shooting digitally, it's the highlights that are critical. Those are what are going to go first. Your camera can hold a lot more detail in the shadows than it can hold in these highlights. We also might add to this a little bit by vignetting it somewhat. And here's a simple way to do it. We're going to come over here and make a duplicate layer simply by grabbing this layer, dragging it down over this new layer icon, and now we have two layers. They are duplicates. They're exactly the same. When you're looking at your layers, remember, if it's highlighted, that's the layer we're working on. The little eyeball is going to tell us whether it's visible or not. If it's off, then you're not looking at that layer. You're actually looking at this layer. But since they're identical at the moment, they look the same. Now, one of the things we can do using these multiple layers is we can change blend modes. And that's what this normal field is. When we click on this, all of these are potential blend modes that we can use. In this case, I want to darken it, but I don't want to mess with the color. So I'm going to use the multiply blend mode. So I'm going to click on that. And now you can see what happened. We darkened this image, but the color is still pretty good. So what I want to do is selectively bring some of this back. And I'm going to do that with a technique called a layer mask. And to do that, I'll come down here to this icon, click on it, and now you can see this new icon. It's got little lines around it. As long as those lines are showing, as long as that frame is showing, then the mask is active. In this case, the mask background is white. So in order to see through it, I need to paint on this with black. So I'll come over here to my paint palette and switch numbers. I can do that several ways. I can either click on this little double-headed arrow, or I can use the X key to change and toggle back and forth between foreground and background. So I'll grab my paintbrush. I'm going to set my opacity down to around 40% because I would rather build to it than try to do it all in one shot. I'm going to make the brush bigger by using the bracket keys. And now I can just click here. If we look over at our layers, we can see what's happened. The center part, the black part, is now transparent. I'm looking through to the lighter layer. Where it's white, I'm still seeing the dark multiply layer. So this makes it a really easy way to create kind of a vignette. And now we've really made our little dog stand out here. So let's try another one. Okay, here we have a nice shot of the Tower of Man in Balboa Park. The sky is rich blue. It's overall a really nice shot. I think the only thing I would do is I'm seeing a little bit of sensor dirt in there. You need to clean your sensor. I want to clean that. And what we're talking about are these little black circles in here. That's gunk on your sensor. Later in the course, we'll talk about how to clean your sensor. And I think to make this stand out, I also want to darken the sky a little bit as if it were shot with greater polarization than this may already have been shot with. So we have two things to do with this. I might also want to see if there's any detail down in these trees I can bring out. Okay, so let's deal first things first. In order to handle these dust spots, we're going to come over here to this icon, to this tool, and we want the Spot Healing Brush tool. With that, now we can come over. I'm going to make the brush a little bigger. This is a brush tool. I'm using my bracket key. I want to make it a little bigger than that spot. Now when I click on it, it turns black. When I let it go, that spot's gone. I can do the same thing here. I'm going to click on it, let go, spot's gone. That makes a really easy way to go through and clean up both dust spots and, in this case, little areas that we would like to get rid of. You can use this same technique to get rid of tension wires, power wires, that kind of thing, little things that are a problem in the shot. So now we've got rid of that. Now let's see what we can do to darken the sky. And we're going to use another layer blend mode to do that. So we'll come over here and we'll make a duplicate layer. We'll just drag this down. By the way, you can also do this with a Control or a Command J. Will create a new duplicate layer for you. In this case, I'm going to use some blending mode trickery to make this work. So let's go to our blending modes, and we're going to select luminosity. What all of these different blend modes do is use one layer, usually the top layer, to influence the bottom layer. And depending on what the blend mode is going to depend how it influences the bottom layer. In luminosity mode, basically, any tones from the top layer are going to be imposed on the bottom. In this case, they're identical, so there's nothing to do to it. But let's change it. Let's go up to Image, Adjustments, Black and White. Now, what's happened is this top layer is now a black and white layer. And you can see that in the little icon. But because what we're seeing over here is this image based on the tones here, it looks like the bottom image. But let's go in and darken the sky. So we're going to take the blues and make them a little darker. Now we could get crazy enough to turn this black if we wanted to, but that's a little overkill. Now I'm going to take the yellows and bring them up just a little so we can brighten some of this. Let's bring a little of the tree back. So we'll say okay. So now, remember what we've done. We've taken the tones from this top one that we just adjusted in black and white and imposed it onto the background. So I'm going to go through and flatten this layer. Layer, flatten image. And now I want to know if I can bring out any of these bushes, or any of these trees, rather. And the quickest way to do that, just to see if there's anything there, is to come into Image, Adjustments, Levels, and let's just lighten this up. Oh yeah, there's all kinds of information in there. Look at that. There's all kinds of stuff there. So I'm going to cancel this. Again, we're going to make a duplicate layer. And on this bottom layer, we're going to do what we did before. We're going to bring those tones up. Now we'll go to our top layer, click on that. We'll make it a layer mask. And because it's a normal layer mask, with our black brush, we can now start to add some tone to this. And it brings this a little more to life. Okay? So these were really pretty easy corrections to make. So let's go on to the next one. Okay, we have a really nice graphic image of all of this bike design with the wheels and the spokes, nice tonalities to it. It's a good capture. There's a few things I think we could do to spiff it up. There's only one thing I regret. There is something red up here which really would set this off if we could see a little more of it. But what we have is what we have. So one thing I'm going to do is get rid of this spot here, and that bothers me. And that, again, we're going to come over here to our spot healing brush, pick that up, cover that, let go, and it's gone. If you have done any black and white work and had to spot negatives or prints, you're going to love this capability. So other than that, and again, the frustration of not having something in here that really stands out in color would be very cool. Now, I don't know what this is on the bike, but I'm going to make up something here just to show you what I'm talking about if we had color. If I were doing this for real, I would try to be a whole lot more precise. I would have zoomed in on it and gotten the outlines exact. What happens when we make a selection with any of these selection tools over here, that area that's selected, that's now marked off with these little marching ants, Adobe calls them, is the only area on the image that we can work with. Everything else is protected, or, to view it another way, is masked. So that means that we can do almost anything we want to this area, and that's the only part that's going to have any effect. So if we came in here and did an adjustment to this, let's say we added some color to it. Now what would happen, I'm going to remove this selection. You can see how something that's a different color really stands out. It becomes the main focal point. Generally speaking, our eyes are going to be drawn to anything that's different from the general surrounding area. So if we had something that really should be this color, and so it had the right tones and the right luminosity to it, then our eye would just zap into that, and that would become our main item. So when you're shooting stuff that is almost monochrome to begin with, look for some area that may be a little different color. Maybe you want a completely monochrome image. That's fine. But maybe you want something that's a little different. Okay? So play with it. You have an endless variety of options. Nice sunset shot. The group's down on the beach looking at the dying sun, waiting for the green flash, hoping it will happen. Not prepared for the disappointment of it not happening. I think what we can do, though, is, first of all, we have to think, where really is our image? And it's right in here. It's right in this circular area. This is what the connection is between these viewers and the sun. The rest of this is here simply to create the environment in which this is happening. What it shouldn't do is detract from it. And there are a few things in here that do detract. Number one, we've got a whole lot of beach area here that isn't really contributing at all to what we're saying here. So step number one is let's come in and get rid of some of that. And now we've got this little guy out here, the little surfer out here. Again, remember what we said before. Your eye is going to go toward anything that's different. Well, that's different, so let's get rid of him because we don't care about him. This isn't about surfing. It's about watching the sunset. So now what we've got with our rule of thirds breakdown is very close to, not exactly, but it doesn't have to be exact, very close to this intersection of thirds. We've got a major portion of our shot. So we're going to naturally be drawn to that area. So we can make this better simply by cropping it and taking advantage of a slightly better composition. What we could do is darken this top if we wanted a little bit to make a little better match for the bottom. To do that without screwing up the color again, I'm going to make a duplicate layer. And I'm going to make that layer a multiply layer. And now what I want to do is reverse the mask. So I can do that one of two ways. I can either simply make a layer mask and then hit Command or Control I to reverse it. Now what's going to happen is my mask icon is black. I need to use white to paint through it, but I only have to paint in the sky area. I don't have to do the bigger portion. There is another way to do it. So let me go back before I added the layer mask. If I hold down the Alt or the Option key when I click on the layer mask, it automatically comes up as an inverted mask, as a black mask. So now I'm going to go over here, pick the white brush, click on that. I want to do this subtly, so I want a big brush. And I just want to come through this a little bit so that we're really more and more looking at them. And I'm going to subtly vignette these sides too. I want to really force you into that shot. So let's see if we've done any good. We'll come over here. This icon on the history palette is called the snapshot tool. It's a little camera. So we'll click up here. We've got our snapshot, which is where we are now. That was our original. Okay. So let's see what else we can do. All right. Well, this is an interesting shot. I recall that the main reason for this was the way the flag stood out, but it is so small in all of this detail. I mean, look at the astonishing amount of eye-catching texture and detail that exists in the top of the stadium with all of the rows, in the trees on the side, in all of these cars getting ready to pull in there, some of them leaving already. There's just too much happening. There may well be a major shot in here. If you wanted to say this is an American stadium, then what I would have done is gotten a little bit closer, maybe a lot closer, if I could, get down into here where I could look up at that flag, put it against this as a background, but make the flag bigger relative to the background by being closer with a wider lens, and really made a statement about that. This has a good start. It's a good eye to look at this and go, okay, in this shot is the shot that I want. Now what do I have to do to bring it out? What do I have to do to make the viewer get what I'm seeing and what I want to have happen? And we've got to make it simpler. Complex shots rarely rarely work really well. Once in a while, but not very often. So I would take this concept and go back and work with it a little bit. From a technical standpoint, it's a good exposure. The focus is good right on the part that you were aimed at. So from a fundamental technical standpoint, this is a pretty good shot. You might be able to make things a little better if we cropped it just a touch. Maybe if we got rid of some of this confusing stuff on each side. We don't need all this roadway in here. And then we vignetted it. So here is another way to do a vignette. We'll start the same. Do a duplicate layer. We'll do a multiply layer on top. Now what we need to do is pick a selection. We're going to pick a rectangular selection, and we're going to come up here at this feather setting. We want not a hard edge selection, but a very soft edge one. And this feather is going to let us set that. If this were a full res image, then we could make this at 400, 500, 600 pixels. As a low res image, we simply can't go that far. So I'm going to try 75 and see what happens when I draw my rectangle. You see the way it is curved in here? That's because of the feather. I would get more curvature with a greater amount of feathering. So let's go to 100 and try this again. There we go. Now, when I make this a layer mask, a normal layer mask, it's going to make the inside part dark and the outside part vignetted. So I want this to be an inverse mask. So I'm going to hold down the Alt key, click on the layer mask key, and now there I have my vignette around all of this. So we're focused in on that, and I can bring this amount of vignette down a little bit with the opacity adjustment. So now at least we're looking more into the area that we want. The tones are really what's going to guide the viewer into what really is the subject matter. Okay, last shot. Last one turned in. This is really an interesting machine. I have no idea what this thing is supposed to do, but it's very cool looking. There were some of the iconic photographers in the early days of this century, Paul Strand was one of them, who loved getting into machinery and looking at the almost sculptural effect of those machines. And this comes close. We have a little bit of background issues. You did a nice job with the depth of field, of softening that somewhat. We may be able to take that down a little more. We also have an issue with this bright white background. I think, for me, here's where the shot is. It's in this part of it. So I think I would probably have shot this as a vertical. But let's see what happens if we bring this in. That actual curvature of the back really isn't important. And some of this stuff back there may not be that important. This is going to leave us less to worry about. So we'll hit enter, see what we have there. Now let's see what we can do to take this white down. Just to save ourselves from disaster, I'm going to make an extra layer. That way, if this blows up on us, all I have to do is kill this layer to start over. There's an interesting fact about these blend modes. These approaches are repeated up in the brush modes. So I have this exact same set of blends. What I'm going to do is come in with the eyedropper tool, and I'm going to pick a natural tone that's in here. Maybe that one. That's not bad. Okay. And I'm going to tell this brush to darken. And what that's going to do is it's going to make this brush paint only on areas that are the same tone as the brush or lighter. So that means I can click away over here and nothing's going to happen because everything here is darker than the brush. But if I click here, could you see that? I'm going to back up so we can do it again. Ready? Watch that white. I'm going to click on this. Could you see it get darker? Put a little tone in there. It's not quite so bright as it was before. I didn't have to mask any of this because this darken mode only lets me paint on areas that are lighter than the brush. So let me fill in some of this white stuff. Now that there is some tone there, if this were just white, there's not much I can do to it. So I'm going to want to play with this a little more. Now I could simply flatten this, but I want to show you another technique. If I hold down the Control, Alt, Shift, and E key, I get a new layer that looks like a flattened layer. It looks like what would happen if I flatten these. It's a process called Stamp Visible. And what it does is basically take the results of these two layers and gives you another one on top. So now I'm going to duplicate that layer. Make a multiply layer. Yeah, it brings that down a bit. I'm going to turn it into a layer mask. Because it's a white mask, I need a black brush. I need to set the brush mode back to normal. Photoshop remembers the last thing you did, and sometimes you forget that, and it isn't acting the way you want it to, and you don't know why, and it's because it's remembering the very last thing. I want to make sure that my brush is very soft. Now, let's help us to just see this part. Okay, that looks a little better. If you look over at this layer mask icon, again, where it's white, we haven't done anything. You're looking at the top darker layer. Where it's black or gray, we are looking through that top layer to the lighter layer beneath it. So if we click off of that, there's our lighter layer. There's with the top layer over it. Now, I am going to flatten it at this point. And I still would like to darken that a little more. I'm going to try to burn that down. Well, if you've read your books and all, you understand. And if you've had black and white classes, you understand burning and dodging. Burning darkens, dodging lightens it. And Photoshop has two tools, a burning tool and a dodge tool. The problem with those is if they're applied to particularly very light areas, they can result in really changing the color of an area. So I don't want that color changed. So the proper way to burn and dodge is to do this. And you've got to do it through the menus. Come up and get a layer, a new layer. And now we could name this if we want. Let's just so we can keep track of it. I'm going to call it a burn layer. I don't care about color. The mode I want is either overlay or soft light. Both of them do the exact same thing. The overlay is just more aggressive in how it does it. What they will do is take the tones of the top layer. If they are darker than middle gray, it'll darken the image under it. If it's lighter than middle gray, it will lighten the image under it. Since I don't want this terribly aggressive, I'm going to use soft light. Now that opened up this line here. And I'm going to click on that. I'm going to tell it I want it to fill with neutral color, 50% gray. When I say OK, now let's look at our layer palette over here. This top layer is gray, and yet we're seeing through to this bottom layer, and that's because it's all middle gray. It's having no effect. If we darken something on this layer, it's going to darken this part. If we lighten it, it's going to lighten it. So let's go back over here, and we want to turn these back to black and white. We'll click on this little icon. First thing I want to do is do some burning. So I'll pick my brush. It's normal. I want to be subtle with this. So I'm going to darken it just a little at a time. But now I might like to lighten a little bit of this. So I'm going to switch to white. Remember, I could have done that with the X key. Adjusting the brush with the bracket keys. Now I've picked up a little bit of that. I still would like a little more there, and I wouldn't mind if it covered up a lot of this, but I want it to be a natural color. So I'm going to flatten this image. I'm going to use the eyedropper to pick up a normal, nice, dark, warm tone. Maybe that one. Let me go a little darker. Now I really want a light brush. I've only got a 15% opacity. There we go. By bringing that down darker. I can really force you to see this stand out a little better. Okay? Now, I want to show you a couple of last quick things. I want to sharpen this a little. The easiest, most common way to sharpen anything is to use the unsharp mask filter. But I want to do it on a separate layer in case it's too much, so I can blend it back and I can select where it's going to be sharpened. I don't want everything in here sharpened. So I'm going to pick up Filter, Sharpen, Unsharp Mask, and here's the way this works. Photoshop sharpens things by going to an edge. An edge is defined as a transition between tones or color, and exaggerate the differences between those two sides of the edge. The threshold is telling it how many levels of difference should there be before it thinks there's an edge. Well, in this case, I'm going to select that later, so I'm going to say 0. The radius is how many pixels out from that edge is it going to make this effect apparent. Well, I don't want it to go very far because I don't want to create a lot of halos, the giveaway for sharpening. So I'm going to keep it low. I'm going to keep it down to 1 pixel. And the amount in percentages is how much difference is it going to make between the existing tone and the now changed tone. How much darker will the darks be? How much lighter will the lights be? Well, let's see what happens if I crank this up. If I go too far, I've now created all of these bizarre little halos. At what point have I just added some sharpness to bring out the textures? Maybe right in there. Well, 200 is a lot to add at one time. It tends to create artifacts. So I'm going to come down here to 100, half of that. Say OK. And now I'm going to apply it again. Remember, Photoshop remembers the last thing you did. So here's my unsharp mask. If I wanted to change the settings, I would have to come down and pick this up and redo it. But if I can do it with the same settings, I can just click here and it does it one more time. Okay. So now I want to just make part of this that sharp. So I want a layer mask. I want a reversed layer mask. So I'm holding down the Alt key, clicking on the layer mask. This is back to my soft image. If I use a white brush, now I can come through. Let me add a little of this. And just select where I want that to be. We've already got some nice depth of field starting to play with this. So I don't want everything sharpened. I just want some of it sharpened. I want to leave some of that nice soft stuff. So now we have a selectively sharpened area. If you look over here where it's white, that's the area that is showing through to the sharpened part. Where it's black or gray, we haven't done anything. So that's one of the easiest ways to sharpen an image. As we go through the course, I'll be showing you other ways to do it. But that's a good starting point. So that's it. That's all the stuff that was turned in for this particular assignment. For those of you that didn't get your stuff turned in on time, I'm sorry, but you also have some catching up you need to do. So I'll see you next time.